Welcome to The Inspired Creative, the podcast for people who need a little help getting inspired or staying motivated to explore their creative side. My name is Paula Castle, and once again, I am by myself tonight. I actually had plans to meet up with one of my friends, and we were going to do an episode of the podcast. We had plans to record. We had about an hour of free time that we were going to be able to squeeze it into. I was very excited to get to talk to her. And then today it snowed in New York, and the weather is a little iffy, and the snow is turning to rain, which is turning to ice, and the roads are not great. So we decided, rather than try to force it, we would just put it off for another week, and hopefully we'll get to talk to her, and you'll get to hear her soon, because I'm very excited to get her on the podcast. But in the meantime, that left me here in my house by myself with some free time this evening. So I thought, let's just sit down and talk. Obviously, I love when I get to have guests on. I love to get to hear their stories. But I realized I also have a lot that I want to share and a lot that I want to say. And I hope that's okay with you guys, especially because this topic that we're going to talk about today is something that has become very important to me over time. And it's something I've suggested to a few people who've already come onto the podcast, and a few people who we have scheduled to come on in the future. And I normally give someone, 3 or 4 options for topics that we can cover. And so far, no one's picked it. And I figured, today's the perfect day. I know what I want to say. How about we just talk about it together, just you guys and me? And so we're going to start off the way we always start, with a quote. This quote is by George Neller, who says, "It seems to be one of the paradoxes of creativity that in order to think originally, we must familiarize ourselves with the ideas of others." And this quote is beautiful in the way that it so perfectly encapsulates this idea that our creativity cannot exist in a vacuum. And this is something that I think it takes time to learn, and it takes time to really come to terms with, especially if you are new to a creative field, or if you are maybe a little insecure or unsure of your own artistic merit in whatever field it is that you're creating. A lot of times I think people get scared. I don't want to say scared, it's the wrong word, but I'll stick with it for now. You'll understand. They get scared and they feel almost a little bit guilty when they get inspired to create based on what they see other people in their field doing, because there is this notion that they are somehow a fraud if they are getting inspired by someone else, because that basically makes them a copycat. Even though obviously no one goes out to be artistic and creative in order to plagiarize other people's work. That's not the mission. That never is. Artistic creativity has to be about creating something new. Otherwise, what's the point? That's not what drives us, is the desire to replicate somebody else's work. We want to create something of our own. But a lot of times when we're going out and we're starting off, or even when we're not starting, we've been in a creative field for a very long time, it is the work of other people that inspires us to go out and do something new. And that's just really fascinating to me. And it got me thinking about why. Why is it that even though creativity is an inherently personal work, it requires that we have some sort of influence or input from people who have come before us, or people who are our peers in our field? And there are certain answers that are very obvious, I think. And we're going to talk about those. But there are other answers that might be a little bit harder to understand. And it's certainly going to be, you're going to have to bear with me, because they will be harder for me to express in a way that sounds even slightly intelligent. This is not my field of expertise. And I am sure that there are experts who have said this so much better than me. But it's something that I've been exploring in my own head, and I just felt like I wanted to share it today. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about why it's so important to have consistent and perpetual access to and an understanding of what other artists are doing in order to thrive in our own creative space. I think the first thing, and perhaps the most obvious thing, is that the artwork of other people and the artistic expressions that already exist are the building blocks that we're going to use to create something new of our own. I'm not a painter, I'm not a visual artist at all. But if you think about visual art, it's very easy to see the progression of visual art over the history of mankind, right? We started off with cave paintings, and then the Egyptians and early civilizations did what we would consider now kind of crude two-dimensional art. And then it got a little bit more elaborate as time went on. And by the time of the Renaissance, they were very aware of and appreciative of the human form. So they were trying to create as naturalistic a look as they could with their art or their expression. And then when you got past that, and I don't know the technical terms for all of these periods, because like I said, I'm not a visual artist. I took a few art history classes in college, but they were mostly about Van Gogh. But the point is that once they got past naturalistic expression and painting things as they see them, then we got into Impressionism, and then we moved into, Cubism, and we moved into extensions of expression. And you can see, even if you can't see a linear pattern that says, all right, I can see why we went from A to B to C to D, you can see that each generation of art and each new movement in the world of art has either built on or subverted the artistic expression of the people who came before them. But the truth is, we're not stuck at square one anymore, because square one was the cave paintings, and then square two was let's say the Egyptians, right? So, we can still create in square one, and we can still paint in the style of square two, but because we have come to square 947, or wherever we are on the timeline of art history, we now have these building blocks, these cultural touchstones that we can use to now reach for more. And when I was thinking about this, the phrase that went in my head and sort of rang the bell of truth as to why this whole concept has sort of been spinning around, it was that the more foundation we have, the higher we can reach. Right? The more building blocks we're using as a foundation, it's the standing on the shoulders of giants principle. The more that has come before, and the more that we know of what has come before, the farther it extends our ability to reach out and do something that maybe hasn't been done before. And that's a really exciting thing, because if you're listening to music or you're looking at art and you're inspired by what you see or what you hear, or you're looking, I know I spoke at a short length on one of my earlier episodes with my brother about how inspired I was just going through Instagram and looking at what artists are doing today, and how that motivated me to want to go back to create in areas that I haven't really gotten into recently, or I've done in the past and then put aside for, time constraints in everyday life got in the way or whatever. But just looking at what other people did inspired me, reminded me, and gave me the desire to push for more. And in part, that is because it reminds me of where we've been. It reminds us of what exists. When we're listening to the evolution of music, let's say, we started at the beginning with banging a drum and maybe making a sound with our voices, and instruments developed over time. But if you think of music today, and it's kind of irrelevant which genre, appeals to you the most. So we're not even going to get into that. But if you look at music today and you look at music from 50 years ago, it is astonishing how much change has happened, how much growth has happened in the last 50 years. If you look at music from 50 years ago and you look at music from 150 years ago, there was less change in the instrumentation. There were fewer, developments technologically, so they were still working with many of the same basic instrument sets that have existed over time. But the difference in sound, again, from generation to generation, year by year, the history of sound and what we define as a song changed so drastically in 100 years or 50 years that it's a thing that can only happen because we know what we know. And because we've experienced what we've experienced. Because if you spoke to someone 50 years ago, they could never create the latest pop hit that exists today. They might be able to create an incredible piece of work but it would be based on their knowledge base, and it would be based on what they had available and the experience and the information that they had about their art form. Whereas now we have all that they had plus 50 more years of technological improvements and creations of new genres and developments of different sounds and an explosion of musical output, because now there's such an explosion of content and there's so many places to get it and so much more readily available, and the sharing of cultural ideas across the globe, because now we're so interconnected that to try to write music without having experienced all of that, we're automatically going to be outdated. We're automatically going to be limited in what we can produce. But it's the people who are on the forefront of that who are now reaching out and trying and doing things that have never been done before. Why? Because they have these blocks that they can build with. And creativity isn't about, developing something out of nothing. Creativity is about using the building blocks that we have to create something that speaks artistically, that speaks to our soul, that speaks to us emotionally. That's the key of creating art. Art isn't about producing something that's never been seen before. Art is about producing something that expresses how you feel. And sometimes that will be so groundbreaking and original and new that people aren't going to know what to think of it. But sometimes it's going to fit within a box. And that's not a bad thing. That does not disqualify us from claiming to be creative or expressive. That's a tool that we can use. It's not a deterrent to our creativity. And I realized this a lot at the beginning of this year because I got much more actively involved in writing music with a few of my friends. At the very end of last year, we sort of got kicked back into high gear on that, and we became active in working together to write together, to produce new music. And we've done this, we've dabbled in it in the past, and I have a couple of people who I work with when this happens. And, most of the time I was very content to let somebody else come up with an idea because, again, I don't necessarily think of myself as a creative person. But they would come up with an idea and I would do my best to support it, embellish it, add to it, develop it, in order to, fill it out and create a full song. And that was my role because, if I'm very honest, I love music, but I don't have what I would consider really strong musical taste. I definitely don't have very modern musical taste. I'm often drawn to things that are older, and that's probably a big influence of my childhood and the things that I learned to appreciate when I was young. And it's just a part of my personality. I'm a little bit of an old-fashioned old soul, and that's okay. But when we're writing music, not everything can sound like it came from the 70s or the 50s or the 20s. People, there's reasons to use those building blocks, but I didn't want to be stuck in the past. So a lot of times I would let my friends come up with an idea, and then we'd run with it together. And it worked very well. But this time around, I really felt the need to be more proactive about it and to not wait for and rely on and require that someone else come up with an idea before we can start working. I wanted to, shoulder my part of the burden. I wanted to find a way to be creative and to come up with something that was relevant. And at a complete loss on how to do that, I started with the most basic thing I could think of. I was like, well, if I want to write music, I should be listening to more music. And so I stepped outside of the genres that I would normally listen to. I stepped outside of the playlists that I like to go back to. And I went to things that I would never normally think of. And I'm not, an expert in any of this. So I would just, find, I'd start with top 40s, and we go into dance and rock and rap and hip hop and, R&B and EDM and all these genres that I'm like, I sort of know what they are, and I'm kind of familiar with the biggest hits from all of them because you can't help but be on these days. And I just sort of dabble and listen. And it was amazing to me. Not that it wasn't amazing that I appreciated this music. It's not what I'm normally drawn to. It's not what I would pick, but I was able to appreciate this music. What was amazing to me was how quickly I was able to find inspiration in this stuff that was not what I would call my music. And so I would listen to a song that had like a really strong dance beat, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I can hear that beat going with, and it took me places that I never imagined I would go. And I think that that's a really important factor in constantly looking to and seeking out and actively watching and observing the art that is around you. Because first of all, if nothing else, it will give you a launching pad. It'll give you a launching place that you can then use to go off and do something that is outside of your comfort zone. Because art should be challenging. Creating should take us outside of a box. It should put us someplace that we're not always used to being. It should give us, it should be emotional. It should be, I don't want to say difficult, but it should challenge us. And one of the easiest ways to challenge yourself is to take yourself outside of where you would normally be. And the easiest way to take yourself outside of where you would normally be is to go and look and see what other people are doing, because they don't think the way that you think and they're not drawn to what you're drawn to. So if you can go and see or hear and appreciate what other people are doing, it can help you to launch yourself out in a direction that you wouldn't necessarily go in. Another reason why this is so important is because art is inherently emotional and creativity is inherently emotive, right? So if looking at art, observing art, experiencing art, I say looking at, but looking at, listening to, watching, seeking, reading, whatever. I'm looking at is going to be my general term, but you know what I mean. If looking at art is designed to create an emotional response, that's a good source of inspiration for us to find an emotion to pull on when we then want to go create art, which requires emotional input. So if we are feeling a little detached from our projects, or we're feeling a little, dare I say, uninspired to go out and create something, well, maybe we just need to go out and find some inspiration in what other people are doing. And the best thing is, it doesn't have to be directly tied to what you're doing. That is a one-on-one correlation that is really easy to understand. Hey, I want to knit something new. Let me go see what the other knitters on Instagram or on Pinterest or on Etsy are doing. That is a really easy and really positive and really proactive way to get inspired. You see something, you're like, oh my God, that looks amazing. I want to make that, or I want to make something like that, or that makes me want to make A, B, or C. That is a direct correlation, and that's amazing and empowering. But sometimes we get inspired by things that have nothing to do with our creative output, right? So you may be sitting in a play and watching a play and all of a sudden have inspiration to design a new outfit. Or you may be, walking down the street and see a sunset that inspires you to write a new song, or whatever your creative outlet is. I remember there was a period of time when I was very actively quilting. And I had a page on Facebook. It was, embarrassingly bad. I had an Etsy shop, where I sold stuff on a pretty regular basis. And I'm not an expert, but I love to quilt. And one day I was doing something and I came across a photograph, and the photo just really caught my attention and inspired some joy in my heart and made me want to go out and make something. I think it was the color scheme of the photo. To be honest, I don't really remember. But there was something about that picture that grabbed me. And it wasn't a picture of a quilt. It was a picture of like Christmas ornaments or something like that. But I took the photo and I put it up on my Facebook page and I said, inspiration of the day or inspiration of the week. And for a few weeks after that, I went out every day and looked for a picture or looked for an idea or listened for a sound or tried to find something that I could put on my page and say it was my inspiration of the day. And that isn't directly related to quilting, but just the act of going out and doing that every day was incredibly inspiring and invigorating and helped me in so many ways to reach outside of my little crayon box of what I would normally do for quilting. And not every inspiration directly inspired a quilt, but it put me in the frame of mind where I was actively seeking that emotional response that would then send me off to go work on something that I was passionate about. Because the thing about creativity is it's always easier when we're feeling inspired. It's always easier when we're feeling impassioned about it. And the easiest way to get passionate and to have that emotional response and have that desire and that drive to go out and create is to constantly be feeding your creative energy, to be constantly feeding your emotional input. And there's no better way than to go out and look at the art of other people. And again, I say look at, but look at, listen to, experience, and seek out what other people are doing. The best part about it is that you and I can sit and listen to the same song, or you and I can look at the same piece of art, and you and I can both be moved. We can both be inspired. We can both walk away feeling something. What you feel and what I feel might be completely different. You know, for one of us, it might spark joy. And for another, it might spark intrigue and mystery. You know, inspiration, even the same piece of inspiration, will always inspire people differently. And that's okay. So anyway, I feel like I'm probably rambling at this point, and I should probably cut this short. But I want to leave you guys with this simple takeaway that your creativity is yours, and it is internal. And it is driven by who you are and how you feel and what you want to express, and all of that is good. But your inspiration is out there in the external world. And it is not only a good idea, I think it is vital if you want to express yourself artistically in ways that are intelligent and powerful and strong, that you not only be aware of, but constantly seeking out and actively looking at what others are doing in the world of your art. It can only make you a stronger artist. It can only inspire you. Don't ever let it discourage you. And I know it can be discouraging to look and see something incredible that someone else has done and think, I will never do what they have done. I've done that many a time, fallen into that trap. And first of all, it's not true. Secondly, that doesn't, even though you will never do exactly what they have done, it does not mean that the things that you're going to do are any less valuable or any less beautiful or any less truthful. So when you're going out and you are exploring what other people have done before you, when you're exploring what is out there, celebrate it. Celebrate the connection that you make with the art of others. Celebrate the fact that their work speaks to you and inspires you. Because I can't imagine a better legacy to have as an artist or as a creative than to know that your art inspired other people to go out and make art, that your song moved someone else to write a song, that your painting brought up another person's belief in themselves to go out and paint or to explore something new in their art. There's no better feeling in the world than to hear that your expression of artistic creativity inspired another artist, because that's the legacy that you want to leave, I would assume. And looking at it from that perspective, I think it gives us, I use the word permission a lot, but it gives us permission to allow ourselves to be inspired by what other people have done, and to take that as a launching point for our own lives, our own careers, our own artistic expression, and to feed ourselves creatively so that we can then go out and express something that is powerful and true that will hopefully inspire someone else. So that's going to be it for today's podcast, but I want to say thank you so much for listening to me. And if you want to follow us or contact me in any way across social media, the easiest way to contact me is The Inspired Creative Pod. So we're on Instagram at The Inspired Creative Pod. We're on Facebook at The Inspired Creative Pod. If you want to email me, ask me questions, talk to me, let me know what you're thinking of the podcast, send in ideas, anything like that. I'd love to hear from you. It's theinspiredcreativepod@gmail.com. And of course, as always, I always ask, but if you're listening to this on YouTube or on iTunes or on Stitcher or on Libsyn or wherever it is that you're listening, we're on platforms that I'm not even aware of, I think, at this point. But take a second and leave a review. It is so incredibly helpful, and of course it's encouraging. Not only does it help me and encourage me, but it also helps other people who are looking at the podcast or maybe stumble across it to get a feel for whether or not it's going to be something that interests them. So again, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for taking the time. Oh, we hit 100 downloads this week, so that was a very exciting development. So thank you so much for downloading and for listening consistently over the last month or so as we're just starting off this podcast. But please feel free to share it with your friends, with your family members, other people you know who listen to podcasts. We'd love to continue to grow and to spread the word. But in the meantime, go out there, find other artists in your field, see what's going on. Don't be afraid to explore your artistic and creative peers. Get inspired, be creative, and let's make this world a more beautiful place.